requirements that.
I'm going to start the recording.
Oh, there you go. Okay, Greg, thank you.
Sorry.
So, my thought is, if you look at kind of what we've been driving in the past, a lot of what comes out of Edge is maybe more specific, but really it's not. It's actually a benefit to bring it back into the data center. A lot of these things looking at more efficient cooling solutions, more operating constrained environmental space and cooling resources. Those are all things that now not only could start in the edge, but actually feed back into the general data center space, right? So kind of if you think about like how hard drives have evolved over time, originally hard drives were these big washing machine shaped things. But then, on the PC side, you had, 5.25 inch floppies, 3.5 inch, and a lot of that technology actually moved back out of the PC world back into the kind of the data center. And so, I kind of see, what we would be doing from the edge could be leading edge into what goes back into the data center, because they could, only benefit from the fact that, you have much more efficient cooling, much more efficient power, much more efficient layouts, that kind of thing. So that's kind of my vision for where I think we could take this group is, by having to operate under these constrained environments, that only helps the larger data center space overall to kind of grow, start the seed for technology and technology innovation that can then, once it starts to gain traction, be picked up and taken back into that larger data center space as well.
So when we're talking about that, probably I agree. Definitely, I think the trend is data center definitely have a lot of advantage. Also considering GPU being so expensive, so the main workload probably should happen in a data center rather than on the edge. I'm just because we have to kind of have the same language to use when we describe what is the edge. I just use one of this RF edge example to tell what we're talking about. So so for things like constrained edge, that's the actual devices and smart device edge. That's the and on-premise edge. Those are still not part of data center. So I feel that even if it's true that most of the training workload, etc., will benefit by doing it within the actual, the data center or call it service provider edge or even the cloud data centers. The real, the edge close to the actual user edge still is needed, because a lot of times you want to process the data and actually got some insight of the data. Or for example, if you do like federated learning, where if you have a medical device, for example, you don't want to capture everything. Some of the data could be kind of can be kind of a sensitive data, right? So those better be processed on the actual user edge device itself. So I feel that while the other big ecosystem in the OCP is trying to define the what's going to do it, make it more efficient, smart and energy efficient in the data center. This could define what's still being left on the actual user edge, and then how to leverage both the computer center remote in the data center as well as the local hardware to make it more efficient.
Yeah, so kind of what I'm seeing is we have these LLMs that keep growing and growing and growing in size. And what my thought is, and what we could do, going back to the AI on the edge, is things around maybe small language models and things that maybe focus on maybe RAG and some other things where you don't have the resources to maybe host these absolutely gigantic parameterized models, but you could start to move some of these things out to these lesser resourced platforms but like right now, everyone's kind of assuming that you just have more and more infinite resources, and maybe that's not what you'd have on the edge per se, or you don't always have the latest and greatest GPU capabilities and those kinds of things. So that's been kind of my thought process within, I don't know, the last 6 to 8 months here is, could people start looking at smaller language models and things that are more adapted to specific low latency edge type use cases, or maybe even data sovereignty type use cases where you don't want to suck up the whole internet in a large language model, but there's still some things you could do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I think we're good. You're gonna say something. Okay. Yeah, I agree. I just, I'll be honest, I'm an amateur on this topic. I'm just love to come here and
Yeah, so because I'm looking at kind of my task right now is to kind of look at these more constrained environment, or constrained platforms where you'd maybe want to start to move AI into a more near real time use cases on the edge, but you don't have access to terabytes and terabytes of storage and these kinds of things. And again, going back to our constrained environment concept that we have on the edge, and the fact that there's kind of two things: is the constrained environment, and then it's also the ability to update and maintain these remote resources, perhaps. And so my thought is this is a whole area that's being maybe not ignored, but isn't really being focused on so much with all of this AI. But it cuts out, I think, a lot of potential use cases that perhaps we could start to bring some focus on, and looking at what do we need to do from a hardware resource perspective to facilitate these things. What I'm kind of talking about is if you look at a lot of these industrial programmable logic controllers, SCADA systems, these kinds of things, they're still operating with a lot of technology that's like 1970s, maybe early 80s based. And you can start to move some AI out into those spaces, but the hardware platforms there are just not really geared toward hosting hosting an LLM, or even maybe even smaller models. They're very still much focused on discrete logic. When I'm kind of thinking of what you could do at the edge, it's especially even around like self-driving and these kinds of things, you're starting to move much more compute power into smaller packaging. What could be done, and what could the OCP contribute to helping to define and specify these platforms? Because that's that's going to be kind of a common a need at some point, is to be able to have a common platform to be able to move software around. Right now I think everything today is very proprietary, but there could be a lot of benefit to what OCP could do to start to perhaps define some default common platform criteria, so that if you're talking about a smart car, these are at least the minimum requirements, and this is kind of how the thing works, rather than kind of all of this proprietary technology that's being put in place on these remote far edges.
Yeah, actually, talking about contribute and OCP, have you contributed to the AI initiative white paper? I'm independent, so I'm not qualified. my understanding at least, I'm not a, it has to be like a OCP organization member to be able to contribute to that white paper.
Yeah, no, I haven't specifically. I'm just kind of facilitating this telco edge, sub working group here. So, um, that may be interesting for me to get more involved with. I just have not been specifically yet. Yeah, I'm just kind of sharing my
May,
thoughts.
may I suggest that you maybe do the since you're qualified to contribute, since you're part of the OCP, maybe we can in this group, even here or even offline, to contribute to the white paper through you.
Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely I'm open to looking into that and seeing what I can do there.
What other folks think? Craig, Rogo, or Rashid?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate for if for you to funnel the things through the work group, and so that you can have some input. I mean, the OCP has a, as you know, an AI initiative across all, and they're wanting to, be inclusive with all of the environments that
Yep.
and things that folks are interested in. Obviously the large, cloud providers, web scalers are obviously interested and have their point of view, but there's other constituents that are, in the OCP that have theirs. One of the things that I think I find very interesting and not is the management aspects that are available with even the large language models where you're uploading your data um, from the edge boxes for troubleshooting, finding issues before they occur, those kinds of things. And from our carriers that have participated in the past, that's one of the things that they find most attractive about the OCP is the manageability of the platforms because there's a common management platform as well. So not even addressing AI as an application for the end user, but actually as that's used for management. I think that's really an important topic for the OCP to develop, say an open source implementation of something that would use that in order to manage OCP hardware. But I mean, I can think of, there's several different applications, and from our traditional edge focus, the 3GPP's 6G initiative is looking to have AI in part of the channel coding, which is very deeply embedded AI, not only at the edge, but even typically at the what we would always call the far edge or at the cell sites themselves, because in the distributed architecture where the VDU is, that's where the connection with the end user would be. And so the end user's equipment, the cell phone itself, would have encoding techniques that would be shared with the VDU that would use AI to track those so that you would have better spatial reuse, higher encoding rates, those kinds of things.
Is there talking about since Craig also agreed that it's a good idea, maybe how do you communicate? Because I still cannot. I've joined a lot of OCP meetings, but I still don't know. Is there actually a Discord or Slack workspace that OCP use to communicate? How do you communicate instant? Just email?
I mean, traditionally, that's what the mail lists are for. Um, Typically, the only use of the mail list in our group, for instance, is just for meeting notices. Is about the only thing that ever goes out. Those are intended to be those. Now, in the past, we've had different different types of of communications, and it's really up to the group, whatever folks would like to use. You know, if you want a Slack or Discord, or, you know, these things kind of evolve and change over time. And so, uh, you know, it's just up to the group how they would like to manage those. And even in addition to, you know, you could have a special topic, and we can have a mail exploder created just on a special topic. So it's not like the entire, you know, say the Edge group's mail list is used for some special kind of topic. Like if we want to work on a white paper or some, you know, like in this case, an input to the OCP, um, you know, there would be a way for us to create that. It's just kind of up to the group.
Yeah. So for this, for just giving feedback about the white paper and channels through, you know, either John or Craig for you to go to the actual white paper. I guess email is the way to communicate, right? There's no Discord or Slack to ping you.
No. I mean, like I said, we can create one. I'm not sure what the current you know, so we have an IT group within the OCP that manages those communication channels. And I'm not familiar with what their current recommendation is for a, you know, kind of a real-time chat program these days. Other than, like I said, the mail list is the typical way to get the communications to, you know, all of the members.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. Is we kind of have the mail list, but you know, if there's something you want, maybe we can bring that back to, as Craig said, the IT team, and you know, see what their suggestions are.
Yeah, it is kind of weird in a way because almost all the other open source ecosystem have use either Slack or Discord. OCP is kind of unique. Anyway, I just posted my email, and you know, whoever, I guess, other than John, Craig, whether Rashid or Raghu want to participate, do you want to share your email? I can at least send you what I
Yeah. Yeah. So Victor, are you on the email list right now?
think so. Yeah.
Okay. I will drop my contact there. Hang on.
Yeah, for this is more of it's not a formal question or anything, right? It's more of a, you know, this is what I think should be in the white paper. I don't, you know, really wish it to be public until we, you know, really get something content ready.
Generally, even if you send a message to the mailing list, it goes to the whole group. So that's the only thing. But yes, as Victor, as John said, I think they can create a smaller group if needed, whenever needed.
Okay.
So I just dropped my OCP contact in the chat there.
Okay. So John, do you want to create a Google Doc and then we can work through that Google Doc?
Yeah, let me I'll reach out to our IT team and see kind of what their recommendation is, and I will reply to you directly.
I think there is a method to add a document as well. So that's generally a Google Drive. That's how I see other groups do it. So
Okay. Yeah, let me
I think it's files or something like that.
yeah, I got to see where we need to create it. You know, because I could create it in my OCP account and share with you guys, but it would probably be better if I get it created
On
in
the
the right
group
place.
itself, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Subgroup. Yeah. At the
Yeah.
subgroup level. Yeah. Anyway, so generally, John, the agenda of this is generally on the telco side, is it? So just I was here for the first time.
Yeah, well, so you know, we kind of had this. We've been having kind of this discussion. Is you know, our edge team sits under the telco sub project, if you will.
Okay. Okay.
But like
That's awesome.
a lot of what we're starting to see is it's not specifically telco related.
Okay.
That's its genesis.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep kind of reaching out to the group thing, saying like, does this still make sense to have us hung under telco? Or does this work for folks the way this is structured? But that's kind of the genesis of this group was really very specifically telco, but a lot of the people that we attract are not specifically telco. Because currently there isn't really any other OCP group that's talking about edge. There's edge parts of other parts.
Yeah. Hang on a second, John. So originally, this group was formed as a special project under the telco group for a specific OCP hardware platform called the Open Edge. And this was a piece of hardware that was to be deployed and is deployed in cell sites.
Okay.
So at the base of
Fair
a
enough.
tower, on the side of the tower, depending on, the carrier's deployment model. And so because that was called the Open Edge and the group was called Open Edge, as others began becoming interested in, this edge, which kind of took on a life of its own, if you will.
Yeah. Mm.
Then now the focus of this group has shifted and we've changed our charter so that instead of focusing just on the Open Edge hardware platform, we now are open for many other types of hardware systems having to do with edge, right? Because at the end of the day, OCP is open source hardware. And
Yep.
so what we've really tried to do now is to focus on being more of use case oriented things for Edge, because there's other the server group, for instance, has created boxes that are to be deployed in the Edge, and then we also have like the campus wireless network that came up with an edge box that'd be used for retail stores, for instance. And so rather than having, multiple groups doing, edge hardware items, that's all really but kind of coalesced into the server group, which has now formed an edge hardware group for the modular hardware systems that would be deployed in what most folks consider an edge site. Right. And a
Okay.
subset of that would be, these cell sites that folks were interested in and have been using the Open Edge platform for.
Okay.
Right. So we're in this flux state is what John is saying, and that the community is what drives the focus of the group, and we've expanded our charter to enable us to be able to take any of these types of efforts. And we've had lots of different groups on, because the Open Edge was a ruggedized piece of hardware. We've now had different types of edges. So, from railway, shipborne, airplanes, and most recently satellites as edge, uh, you know, areas of interest. There's not been any kind of, no one's been willing to put together a white paper or some position paper on what that would mean. But I think that's kind of what I see Victor, wanting to do is to, I think you talk a lot about the Linux Foundation and their edge taxonomy, and we need a similar thing for the OCP to help focus the OCP's uh, interest and direction on what's needed for edge. Like, why would we not just use Linux Foundation's edge, for instance? right? Does that have sufficient information for, say, the hardware teams to develop, specific hardware that's required that would, and in OCP, you're always saying like the open edge, for instance, because it was an open specification, it ended up being manufactured by 7 different companies, so you could buy it, from your choice of supply chain. And that's kind of what the OCP is really set up for, is that all of these things are, have this not only a scale factor, but scale usually implies, an implementation that can be replicated by multiple people without having each, organization create their own specific hardware and say, this is our edge box and this is our edge box. But you can have
Yeah.
one common system that has some requirements and some specifications that the community has determined would be important or usable. And sometimes we call that, fellow travelers, right? So there's folks who are wanting to deploy edge equipment and they have certain requirements for those that they would like to have those requirements met. And that's really what we're trying to facilitate.
Yeah. So like what Craig was saying was, my background came out of that open edge, and I had previously been kind of working in this very telco specific domain, but now I'm working more in kind of this industrial space, and looking at kind of more of these what you would classically call like embedded systems. But as those are starting to become more communication aware, and needing to hook into the larger macro network, um, that's kind of my interest has kind of shifted from when I first started running this group to what I'm looking at now. And it's kind of paralleling a little bit, kind of what we're seeing with just kind of the general audience that we're attracting into this team is, looking beyond, kind of it's kind of all these remote edge use cases where it's really kind of a more um, environmental and reduced or constrained resource type environments, if that makes sense. So yeah,
thanks for that update. Yeah. No, I was just
yeah,
trying to see whether, I mean, something was already ongoing, right? So it was on the open edge as it was originally formed, and it has now taken extra responsibilities of the larger edge. So I just wanted to see that whatever we have been doing for telco, for the cell side and things like that, that will continue, in my opinion, correct? So, and we'll
yes.
start including the other things. Okay.
Yeah, because I think kind of what you're seeing is telco starting to also kind of expand into these other areas.
Yeah.
Um,
And
because it's
most
really
recently at the last summit, MyTac has, for instance, put a new system out that is a VDU focused hardware that's I guess you'd say it's inspired by the open edge, but that kind of continues on, as well as, AT&T has some work that they've been doing on a very large router that's in the telco space rather than in the edge space. But even in the edge space, there are still some hardware platforms that move through the group. Doesn't really garner as much discussion on our meetings, but then end up, going through the machinery, if you will, of the OCP to release these open specs.
Okay.
So it's not like we're totally forgetting that. And the thing too is that if there's common travelers who would like to have a system developed, this would be a perfect place for that to be developed if there was enough uh, interest in it. I know the railway folks were very interested in a system, and the shipborne folks were as well. I'm not sure where they've taken that work or if if they're just buying from OEMs or something at this point. But, that's still an available option.
But yeah, ideally we could collate the requirements from naval satellite, industrial, telco, from a hardware perspective, right? And it's all these places where you have this environmental, you have heating issues, cooling issues, power issues, space issues. That seems to be the commonality across, what you would, at least my thought would be like edge is, it's not the data center that has the luxury of unlimited cooling, unlimited power, unlimited space. You're trying to put this stuff in these other environments, and what are the hardware requirements? And like, if we could start to find some commonality around all these diverse remote location things, you could start to have an open source specification for this hardware that's small, space constrained, power constrained, cooling constrained, that could satisfy all these different things. That's the interesting thing to me from what I'm seeing what's happening in this team. So it's like as Craig said, like not giving up on telco, that's still a thing. It's just that telco is kind of expanding into all of these other things that also have the same constraints and this environmental restrictions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So so Victor, you shared this link to the Linux Foundation Edge. Is that something that you want to kind of have our team kind of promote as what OCP should do?
Well, that's when I first get involved when it comes to interested in community discussion on edge computing. So I'm not, but I'm not really leading that effort. So not necessarily.
Okay.
It's just one. It's just one definition about edge computing, because there's so many different definitions of edge computing. I feel that's more kind of standard way to talk about things. So if there's another way to talk about things, I'm open to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, so kind of what we would like to kind of do from the OCP, as Craig was saying, is kind of drive this hardware aspect to things that's traditionally been kind of the OCP approach. And that's where I see a lot of value that we could bring to the rest of OCP, is to start helping them, and we've been talking about this modular approach that's being proposed in other parts of OCP, to being able to start to contribute some more requirements into their work, to look at, what does it mean to be able to swap out, say a CPU? And are the connectors and things that they're utilizing, are those applicable for us on the edge? Are they robust enough? Are they tolerant enough for these harsher environments? These kinds of things, where maybe that's not a consideration that they're thinking about in the perfect world of a data center, that we would have maybe on the edge side of the house, if that makes sense. So maybe you need more robust connectors, or ways that are locking things in so they can't vibrate loose, or heating and cooling doesn't cause them to dislodge, and these kinds of things, because you don't have perfect cooling all the time. So
there's all kinds of possibilities, which I'm pretty surprised that OCP doesn't cover edge as much. I feel there's definitely a need to. There could be a lot of different, like you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, to give you an example. So in my previous life, I talked to a lot of was involved with discussions around a lot of different OEMs who were starting to take bits and pieces of OCP, but then adapting them for these remote, harsh environments in different ways. And so I was like, oh, wow, it would be really nice if you all contributed into our Edge team here so that you all are coming up with a standard way to take these OCP-ish things and do it the same way so that like you're not everybody's reinventing the wheel and creating a whole bunch of different solutions for the same problem. Because they're already basing it kind of on an open source hardware designs out of OCP, but they were picking and choosing different parts and then implementing it, or like so you didn't have the benefit of wanting to go to maybe some of the larger OEM parts of maybe Intel, AMD, what have you, and go, oh, if you just built your chip this way, it would work in this thing. It was kind of like creating all kinds of different solutions that would fall back on, Intel, AMD, ARM, whoever, to come up with like 5 different ways to solve the same problem. And that's kind of what I was seeing in my previous lifetime working with Open Edge, and then kind of its evolution into where it was going with some of these different OEMs.
I'd love to learn from that history and how to apply to AI.
Yeah. So like you talk to PC vendor 1, they would take OCP and use it this way. You talk to PC vendor 2, they take OCP and use it that way. But they were both trying to solve the same problem, but they picked and chose different parts of OCP to use. And it's like, well, wow, it'd be really nice if you both kind of picked and chose the same things, and then we'd kind of have the same thing we have with Open Edge and kind of the standard approach to a hardware practice.
Yeah, I just in the last the initiative meeting, the big meeting, my understanding that was discussed is, for example, I think NVIDIA is taking on their latest Blackwell. I believe was starting to adopt the OCP modular design standard instead of their own. So it's amazing that how OCP can affect influence anyone's design.
Well, and I think that's the right approach, right? Is at the end of the day, people don't want to be locked into a thing, but like if somebody's providing it and it has that flexibility, then that makes the vendor stronger. And makes the case easier for you. Whoever's going to be the one that leads it, I think will drive it. And so that's my kind of hope is we get some innovative people in here that really want to kind of drive and be kind of the leader to start to drive this and say we're not a closed system. We're going to kind of go this open approach, and we're leading there.
Yeah. Look forward to the discussion here.
So yeah, I've taken your input. So I'll see what we can do to kind of maybe. So what I'm hearing from our folks here on the call today is you guys would like a more interactive, rather than just kind of the email server approach, and kind of see what if we can work through a Google Docs approach, or and if we do that approach, where should we save that and do that so that it's kind of OCP aware rather than just kind of being tied to my specific Google account. And then
you can check whether there is a Google Workspace type of thing for this group. Then we can use a Google Drive or even Google Chat if they have. Then that is also possible.
Okay. Yep. Fair enough.
Yeah. And
so Craig, maybe you and I can.
Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please. Another thing which I wanted to check was The from because I don't have enough exposure to the what constitutes edge. The Do we have different grading techniques for the environments where the edge is to be deployed, right? For example, the what is edge requirements for railways is going to be different for satellites, different going to be for retail or enterprise, right? Or individual residential. So if there is a way of grading the requirements and driving that for its life cycle, for its serviceability, for its security and everything, and networking conditions at that locations, I think that will expand into a huge, in my opinion, a big workspace. So hence, I was wondering if there's already some effort to other standards or bodies or within OCP as well. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, so Craig, what are your thoughts there? I mean, that seems like that could be a really good contribution that maybe somebody could start, and then maybe that's something we could start to drive from the team as a contribution. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that we have several documents, both in the telco group and in Edge, having to do with telco requirements, NEBs, the different Bellcore uh, requirements for Edge equipment. But that we don't have anything for any of these other groups. So, that's what I'm saying, that the railway, the side of the rail folks, and that wasn't on the trains. These were boxes that were placed on the side of the rails. So it had some vibration requirements and stuff because of the loads going past.
Mm-hmm.
Which is different than, some of the Bellcore specs for telco vibration things, right? Which are all covered in the open edge. And so
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. There's never been any uh, concerted effort to characterize these loads in the form of, a document,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's what we're saying. Yes, this would be a great thing for the group to work on. We've just not been able to get folks to work on it. It's not, we're not going to be able to do the work. We can facilitate the work. So I mean,
Yeah, like
it's totally up to the group. So we'll work on getting if email's not a good way of discussing it, we need something more interactive. Like I said, we've had Slack channels before. There's, you know, we've been doing OCP since 2015. There's been
Mm-hmm.
a plethora of interactive chats from IRC channels, all the way through. And we're more than willing to facilitate however we can these conversations. But the end goal is to have something documented that we can put into the OCP repository so that other folks who are coming behind us will not have to, have a bread trail to follow, or, okay, we gotten this
yeah,
far, now let's take it the next step.
like Craig and I are volunteering as much as we can. Like we kind of need somebody to volunteer. If somebody wants to do this, to volunteer to at least lead that, and then we can help build the team and that kind of thing. It's not like Craig and I just sit around all day like going, okay, somebody tell us what to do. you know, but if we can start to get multiple people on this call to contribute, then it's not falling on any one person. So somebody wants to kind of lead those things. Craig and I can kind of facilitate and help them, but it's not that Craig and I just sit around all day figuring out like, okay, this is what we're going to do and tell everybody what to do. It's whoever wants to step up, contribute some time, start to facilitate it. We can help, jump on and help to drive somebody to start to bring all these people together, if that makes sense. So
Got
it's
it,
not
John.
my call, it's not Craig's
Okay.
call. It's like it's our community.
Yeah.
So Craig and I are contributing our time to kind of facilitate the community now. Like if somebody wants to come in and say, okay, I want to facilitate driving this, okay, then we can help them. It's not like it's going to fall all on you to do, but like if somebody wants to step forward, then we can start to build some momentum around, okay, this person's going to start to drive this. Let's help them. Let's get them going. And so, because they're just going to volunteer some time. And, now we collectively start to make some progress, right? But like, it's not like Craig and I just are looking for stuff to do. We're going to do it. It's we're trying to help everybody coordinate and collaborate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it is nice that you are contributing your time already, right? So thanks for that.
Yeah. So it's totally Craig and I will take this wherever anybody wants to take it. Just somebody start to let us know where we want to go, and we'll get behind you and start to make this happen. And I've got some thoughts, and I can contribute some time, and if somebody else wants to help me, and somebody else wants to volunteer, then we can start to make some things happen. But really, it's kind of
John, what we have done is we have modified the charter to enable our group to be able to work on these things, right? Because we have to do things that are within the charter. I mean, when you look at the OCP as as an organization, it's driven by the charters of the projects. There are certain requirements that the projects have to meet in order to stay an active project. We're doing those things. We've modified our charter to address basically any idea that folks want to work on. We believe that we have sufficient leeway within our charter, provided it's related to Edge, to be able to do that. And even to the point of with the telco group, one of the issues that we had was when we first came to the OCP and several of the carriers presented their ideas to some of the different working groups, the server, at that point there was like the rack group, the server group, the network group, the management group, or projects, I should say, high level projects. And what happened was they go, well, that's not within our charter to do NEBS requirements or to do ruggedization. And so the telco group then was formed in order to find a home for these projects that weren't accepted by what the web scalers were interested in doing, who were the majority of the community at that time. Right? And so we've done that. We've done that work. But that's, kind of the extent of what we can do from our positions as, project leads, and then, I'm on the steering group committee lead, right?
Okay.
But we're here to support you. I mean, don't get me wrong. We've been preparing and making updates to the charter and positioning this group to be able to go forward with a use case or these requirements, as soon as there's an opportunity.
Well, yeah, and I think as soon as somebody wants to kind of step forward, put something out there and propose it, I think we'll jump behind it. But like, it kind of depends on, where everybody wants to take this. And if somebody's willing to just, wanting to kind of start it, and I think we can jump behind it. And it's not that you're gonna own it. We can then channel everybody who's joining us. And we get just before Christmas there was a lot of Intel people we had on the call. So I think if we can start to have somebody who wants to drive something, that would be fantastic, and we can start to channel everybody. but so somebody's got to kind of make the first move, propose something, put it out there, and then
Right.
I would love to take something that somebody wants to take and drive.
Okay,
But,
got it.
go ahead,
And
Chris.
two, it's not, and by the way, guys, this is not just us, like John and Craig, but actually we're speaking, for the OCP Foundation, because they have, their blog entries, the different things that the foundation does to generate interest. So when John's saying, well, we've got something we can go run with it, that's not just us going and running with it, but the OCP Foundation will obviously support these efforts because it's, in the best interest of the OCP to cover as many areas as possible. And, we're open source hardware believers. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Frankly, I mean, I got more about how OCP operates from YouTube rather than from any other group, right? So
Right. Well, a lot of groups are very, they kind of got their blinders on because they have some direction that they're going in, their heads down, working on some, specification or, whatever that is that they're working on.
yeah,
And they don't really talk as much about the process. In our group, that's one of the things that, our responsibility is to guide this process and to help folks be effective in the OCP. So, we talk about it more than perhaps some of the other groups that are, have certain, specific items, work items that they're working on, right?
Yeah, they
yeah,
have a very focused. They have a focused direction, and they're trying to heads down to get something done.
yes.
And we've kind of been there, but now we're kind of shifting gears and opening the funnel because we're starting to see a whole lot of other interest here, other than just as Craig said. When this started, it was Open Edge, and it was the Open Edge telco server. But there's definitely a lot more interest. But like just finding out somebody wants to drive something and take it forward, and then we can all get behind it. That's kind of where we're at in terms of where we are as a team.
Thank you.
Okay, guys.
Okay, thank you.
If there's anything else, I appreciate your all's input, and this was great discussion, and I hope you'll join us next month. And if we can start to build some more momentum, that would be fantastic. And if you guys have any input, I'll come back with the requests that you've had. I'll let you know what we can find out when Craig and I meet with the rest of the OCP team. We'll bring the request and let you know when we find out.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Well, thank you all. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.